I tested my wife by saying I lost all our savings, but what I overheard next changed everything. David Chen sat alone in his Tesla. The engine was off. The street outside was quiet. His hands gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He was 36 years old, and 2 months ago, he made a decision that destroyed his marriage but saved his life. Through the windshield, he could see the warm glow of their Brooklyn brownstone. Park slope, exposed brick, original hardwood floors, $1.8 million worth of what used to feel like home. Inside, his wife Rachel was probably scrolling through Instagram on the couch, completely unaware that the next 10 minutes would shatter everything she'd been planning for the past 4 months. David pulled out his phone. His finger hovered over the voice memo app. He'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times in his head, but now that it was here, his throat felt tight. 6 words. That's all it would take. Rachel, I lost everything in crypto. He closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't some jealous husband manufacturing drama where none existed. This was survival. Because 3 weeks ago, David had overheard something that changed the way he saw his entire marriage. And tonight, he was going to find out if the woman he loved had been playing him all along. He opened the car door and stepped out into the cool November air. The lie was ready. The recording app was open. And somewhere in that house, Rachel had no idea that her carefully constructed plan was about to collapse. David Chen wasn't just testing his wife. He was about to expose the truth she'd been hiding for months. And once he heard what she said when she thought he couldn't hear her, there would be no going back. This is the story of a man who had to destroy his marriage to save himself. And it starts with a lie that revealed the biggest betrayal of his life. David walked up the front steps. His hand reached for the doorknob. Inside, Rachel was waiting. And in less than an hour, everything they built together would be gone. But maybe, David thought as he pushed the door open, it was already gone long before tonight. If you've ever wondered what someone would do if they lost everything, if you've ever questioned whether the person next to you truly loves you or just loves what you provide, then stay with me. Because this story doesn't just end with betrayal. It ends with a choice that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the price people are willing to pay for security. Like this video if you're ready for a story that will leave you speechless. Subscribe if you want more true stories that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. And comment below telling me where you're watching from, because this story is about to take you on a ride you won't forget. Now let me take you back to where it all started. David Chen wasn't always the kind of man who lied to his wife. In fact, for most of their 6 years and 4 months of marriage, he prided himself on being honest, dependable, maybe even a little boring. He was a senior software architect at a fintech startup in Manhattan, pulling in around $240,000 a year. Good money. The kind of money that bought them the brownstone, the 2 international vacations every year, the comfortable life that made Rachel's part-time freelance design work feel like a choice rather than a necessity. Rachel worked maybe 20 hours a week. Graphic design for small businesses, the occasional branding project, some web design workshops she taught at Pratt Institute. She brought in around $35,000 a year. It wasn't much, but David never cared. He'd encouraged her to pursue what made her happy, never pressured her to work more, never made her feel like she wasn't contributing enough. They kept their finances mostly separate. His investment account, her checking account, a joint account for shared expenses. It felt modern, independent, like 2 equals building a life together. Or so David had believed. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and David had left work early with food poisoning. Rare for him. He was the type who pushed through migraines and worked from home with a fever, but that day his stomach had rebelled so violently that even his boss told him to go home. He'd driven back to Brooklyn in misery, parked in the driveway, and walked through the front door around 2:30 in the afternoon. The house was quiet except for one thing. Rachel's voice, drifting down from the home office upstairs. Sharp, focused, animated in a way she never was with him anymore. David had frozen in the hallway. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop. But something about her tone made him stop. I'm telling you, Van, I just need to hold on a little longer. Once we cross that 7-year mark, the maintenance calculation changes completely. My lawyer said. She'd stopped mid-sentence. The old floorboard near the stairs had creaked under David's weight, and Rachel must have heard it. By the time David reached the office doorway, Rachel was standing by the window with her phone pressed to her ear, face flushed, eyes wide. Yeah, okay, talk later, she'd said quickly, her voice suddenly bright and casual. She'd smiled at him, that same smile she'd given him 1,000 times before. But this time, David saw something underneath it. Something that looked like panic. Didn't expect you home so early, she'd said. Food poisoning, David had replied. He'd kept his voice normal, kept his face neutral, even though his mind was already racing. Gonna grab some Pepto and lie down. Rachel had nodded, already moving past him toward the stairs. Feel better, babe. And that was it. She'd left the office. Left him standing there with 3 phrases echoing in his head like a drumbeat he couldn't stop. 7-year mark. Maintenance calculation. My lawyer. They'd been married for 6 years and 4 months. David had taken the Pepto-Bismol. He'd gone to the bedroom. He'd lain down on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling for 2 hours while his mind ran through every possible explanation. Maybe he'd misheard. Maybe she was talking about a friend's divorce. Maybe it was nothing. But deep down, David knew. That wasn't nothing. That was something. That was the kind of something that didn't go away with a good night's sleep and a rational conversation. So David started watching. Not obviously. Not in some creepy stalker way. He just started paying attention to things he'd been too comfortable, too trusting, to notice before. And once he started looking, he couldn't stop seeing. The way Rachel pulled away whenever he tried to kiss her. Not dramatically. Just a small lean back, a turn of her head so his lips landed on her cheek instead of her mouth. The way she barely looked up from her phone during dinner anymore, scrolling through Instagram or texting someone while he talked about his day. The way she'd stopped asking him questions. Stopped caring about his projects at work, his frustrations with his team, the things that used to spark actual conversations between them. And then there were the clothes. Rachel had started moving things into the guest room closet. Not all at once, just a few pieces at a time. Designer jeans, her favorite sweaters, some of her jewelry. When David asked about it, she'd shrugged and said she needed better organization, that the master closet was too cramped. But the guest room closet was smaller. It didn't make sense, unless she was preparing for something. The financial things were even more obvious once David knew to look for them. Rachel had started pushing him to add her name to his Vanguard investment account. The one he'd built up to $380,000 before they'd even met, funded by years of disciplined saving and decent stock picks during the tech boom. She'd brought it up casually the first time, over coffee on a Sunday morning. You know, we should really combine everything. Be a real team. Show that we trust each other completely. David had hesitated, not because he didn't trust her, but because that account represented his entire financial safety net. His pre-marriage nest egg. The thing that made him feel secure. Rachel had noticed the hesitation. Her face had tightened. We've been married 6 years, David. 6 years. And you still don't trust me enough to put my name on your account? It's not about trust, David had said. It's just, whatever, Rachel had interrupted. Forget I said anything. And then she'd given him the silent treatment for 2 days. Cold shoulders at breakfast. 1-word answers at dinner. Sleeping with her back to him at night. David had almost caved. Almost added her name just to make the tension go away. But something stopped him. Some instinct he couldn't quite name. She brought it up 3 more times over the next 6 weeks. Each time with a slightly different angle. Don't you want us to feel like real partners? What if something happens to you and I can't access anything? Are you planning to leave me or something? That last question had hit David like a slap. No, of course not. Why would you even say that? Rachel had shrugged. Just seems weird that you're so protective of money you earned while we've been together. But that wasn't true. David had earned most of that money before they'd even met. She knew that, so why was she rewriting history? The pieces were there. David just hadn't wanted to see them. But after overhearing that phone call, after hearing the words 7-year mark and my lawyer in his wife's voice, he couldn't unsee them anymore. So David made a decision. He was going to run a test. And if Rachel passed, if she proved that his suspicions were just paranoia and stress and overthinking, then he'd apologize. He'd work on their marriage. He'd do better. But if she failed, if she revealed what David was starting to fear was true, then he needed to protect himself before it was too late. David called his attorney on a Thursday morning. Not just any attorney. Jennifer Pock, the same sharp, no-nonsense divorce lawyer who'd represented his friend Michael 3 years ago when Michael's wife cleaned him out in a brutal separation. Jennifer's office was in Midtown, all glass and steel and expensive minimalism. David sat across from her desk and laid it all out. The overheard phone call, the 7-year mark, the pressure to add Rachel to his accounts, the emotional distance, the clothes in the guest room, everything. Jennifer listened without interrupting. When David finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers, studying him with dark, assessing eyes. "What you're describing," she said slowly, "is called strategic positioning. If your wife is planning to file for divorce, she's likely been advised by her attorney to wait until you cross that 7-year threshold. In New York, that can significantly impact spousal maintenance duration and calculations. Especially with your income level." David felt his stomach drop. "So you think she's—" "I think you need proof," Jennifer interrupted. "Suspicions won't protect you in court, David. You need documentation. You need her to reveal her intentions clearly, preferably in a way that can be verified." "How do I do that?" Jennifer tapped her pen against her desk. "People reveal their true priorities when they think the money is gone. If your wife is staying in this marriage primarily for financial benefit, and if she's calculating how to maximize her payout, she'll show you that when she believes there's nothing left to gain." David stared at her. "You're saying I should lie to her?" "I'm saying you should create a scenario that reveals the truth. There's a difference." "What kind of scenario?" Jennifer leaned forward. "Tell her you lost a significant amount of money. Something catastrophic. A bad investment, a crypto crash, whatever feels believable for your situation. Make it real enough that she thinks your financial stability is gone. Then watch what she does. Listen to what she says when she thinks you can't hear her." "That feels manipulative." "It is," Jennifer said bluntly. "But so is staying in a marriage you've checked out of just to hit a magic number that maximizes your divorce payout. The question is, do you want to protect yourself, or do you want to be a victim of someone else's strategy?" David didn't answer right away. Part of him still hoped this was all a misunderstanding. That Rachel loved him. That the phone call had been taken out of context. But another part of him, the part that had been watching his wife pull away for months, knew better. "If I do this," David said quietly, "and she says something incriminating, can I record it?" Jennifer nodded. "New York is a one-party consent state for recording. As long as you're part of the conversation, or as long as the recording device is on your person in your own home, you can legally record what's said. And if she makes statements that prove she's staying in the marriage for financial strategy rather than genuine affection, that can significantly impact any maintenance claims she tries to make. So I set up the scenario, record her reaction, and then what? Then you file first. Before she does, you take control of the narrative, present your evidence, and negotiate from a position of strength rather than defense." David looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. Somewhere out there, Rachel was probably at a coffee shop, or teaching a workshop, or texting Vanessa about God knows what. Living her life like everything was normal. Like she hadn't been planning an exit strategy for months. "Do it," David said. "Tell me exactly what I need to do." Jennifer smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who'd seen this story play out 100 times and knew exactly how it ended. She pulled out a legal pad and started writing. David left Jennifer's office 2 hours later with a plan. It was simple, brutal, and if it worked, it would either save his marriage or end it. But at least he'd know the truth. Step 1 was easy. Go home and act normal for a few days. Let Rachel think nothing had changed. Step 2 was the hard part. Pick a night, preferably soon, and deliver the lie. Make it believable. Make it devastating. Make Rachel think that the comfortable life she'd been enjoying was about to disappear. Step 3 was the most important. Record everything. Her immediate reaction. Her phone calls afterward. Any conversations she had when she thought David couldn't hear her. And step 4, if the recording revealed what David feared it would, was to move fast. Secure his assets. Change his beneficiaries. File for divorce before Rachel had a chance to execute whatever plan she'd been building with her attorney. David drove home in silence. No music. No podcasts. Just the sound of his own breathing and the hum of the Tesla's electric engine. When he pulled into the driveway, Rachel's car was already there. She was home. He sat in the car for a moment, staring at the house. Their house. The place where they'd hosted dinner parties and celebrated anniversaries and made love on lazy Sunday mornings. The place that was supposed to represent forever. But forever, David was learning, was a lot more fragile than he'd thought. He got out of the car and walked inside. Rachel was in the living room, curled up on their West Elm sectional with her MacBook open. She looked up when he entered, and for just a fraction of a second, David saw something flash across her face. Annoyance, maybe. Or impatience. But then it was gone, replaced by a softer expression that might have been concern. "Hey," she said, "you're home early." David set his messenger bag down by the door. "Yeah, slow day. Thought I'd skip the evening rush." Rachel nodded and went back to her laptop. David watched her for a moment, trying to see past the surface. Trying to remember when things had changed. But he couldn't pinpoint it. It hadn't been a single moment. It had been a slow erosion, so gradual he hadn't noticed until it was too late. "I'm gonna grab a beer," David said. "You want anything?" "I'm good," Rachel replied without looking up. David went to the kitchen and opened the fridge. He pulled out an IPA and stood there for a moment, the cold air washing over him. In 3 days, he was going to lie to his wife. He was going to tell her that everything they'd built was gone. And depending on what she said next, their marriage would either survive or shatter. But standing there in the kitchen, beer in hand, David already knew which way it would go. He could feel it in the way Rachel barely acknowledged him anymore. In the way she'd stopped asking about his day. In the way her eyes glazed over whenever he tried to share something that mattered to him. She'd already left. She just hadn't filed the paperwork yet. David closed the fridge and took a long drink of his beer. 3 more days. Then he'd know for sure. And if he was right, if Rachel had been playing him all along, then he'd make damn sure she didn't get to walk away with half his life as some kind of consolation prize. He walked back to the living room. Rachel was still on her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. She looked focused, almost intense. David wondered what she was working on. Or who she was texting. "Hey Rach," David said casually. "What are you working on?" Rachel glanced up. "Just some client stuff. Rebranding project for a boutique in Williamsburg." "Cool. How's it going?" "Fine." That was it. Fine. Not great, not frustrating, not anything with substance. Just fine. The kind of word you used when you didn't want to have a conversation. David sat down on the other end of the couch. He pulled out his phone and pretended to scroll through emails, but really he was just watching Rachel out of the corner of his eye. She typed for another minute, then closed her laptop and stood up. "I'm gonna take a bath," she said. "Long day." "Okay." Rachel walked past him toward the stairs. She didn't touch him, didn't lean down for a kiss, didn't even brush her hand against his shoulder. She just walked by like he was a piece of furniture. David listened to her footsteps on the stairs, heard the bathroom door close, heard the water start running. And in that moment, sitting alone in the living room of the house they'd bought together, David felt the last shred of doubt dissolve. Rachel wasn't his wife anymore. Not really. She was a stranger wearing his wife's face, waiting for the right moment to walk away. But she didn't know David was about to beat her to it. 3 days later, on a cold Monday evening in November, David sat in his Tesla outside their brownstone and prepared to deliver the lie that would change everything. He'd spent the weekend acting normal. He'd cooked breakfast on Saturday. Watched a movie with Rachel on Sunday, even though she spent most of it on her phone. He'd been pleasant, affectionate, unremarkable. Just another weekend in a marriage that looked fine from the outside but was rotting from within. Now it was Monday, the night David had chosen. And in his jacket pocket, his phone was set to record. Jennifer had walked him through it. Keep the phone in your pocket with the voice memo app running. New York law allows it as long as you're part of the conversation or the device is on your person in your own home. Whatever Rachel says, whatever phone calls she makes afterward, if you're in the house and the phone is recording, it's admissible. David had tested it over the weekend. Left his phone recording in his jacket while he moved around the house. The audio quality was good enough. Clear enough to hear voices, to make out words. Now it was time. David took a deep breath and opened the car door. The November air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace. He walked up the front steps and pushed open the door. Rachel was exactly where he'd expected her to be. Living room, sectional, iPad in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and David saw it again. That brief flash of annoyance before she rearranged her face into something softer. "You're home early," she said. David set his messenger bag down. Carefully, deliberately, like a man whose world was falling apart. "Rachel, we need to talk. Something happened today." Rachel set down her iPad. Her expression shifted to something that might have been concern. Or might have been wariness. David couldn't tell anymore. What is it? She asked. David let himself sink into the armchair across from her. He rubbed his face with both hands, buying himself a second to get into character. Then he looked up at Rachel, and he let the words fall out like stones. I lost everything. Rachel blinked. What? That crypto investment I told you about last year. The one I put $340,000 into. It crashed. The whole platform collapsed. There's an FBI investigation. I'm not getting any of it back. For just a split second, Rachel's face went completely blank. David watched the blood drain from her cheeks. Watched her eyes go wide. And then, in rapid succession, he watched her cycle through emotions like someone flipping through TV channels. Shock, confusion, and then something else. Something that looked a lot like panic. You lost $340,000? Her voice came out higher than usual. Tight. But that was your entire investment account. David, how could you? It doesn't matter how, David interrupted. He kept his voice flat. Defeated. The point is it's gone. We're going to have to make some serious changes, Rachel. We might have to sell the brownstone. Move somewhere cheaper. I've still got my salary, but without those investments, our financial cushion is completely gone. David watched Rachel's face drain of what little color was left. Her hands gripped the edge of the iPad like she needed something solid to hold onto. Sell the brownstone? Her voice cracked. David, we can't just. We might not have a choice. David pressed on. And my 401k? I'm probably going to need to borrow against it to cover our property taxes this year. The market's terrible right now. Could be years before I rebuild what I lost. Rachel stood up abruptly. I need to process this. This is insane. I know it's a shock. David kept his voice soft. Apologetic. I'm devastated. Rachel nodded, but she wasn't looking at him anymore. Her eyes had gone distant, unfocused. Like her mind was somewhere else entirely. Calculating something David couldn't see but could definitely feel. I'm going to call Vanessa, Rachel said suddenly. I just need to talk to someone. Is that okay? Of course. David gestured toward the stairs. I'll be in the office if you need me. Rachel grabbed her phone off the coffee table and practically ran up the stairs. David heard the bedroom door close. Hard. Not quite a slam, but close. He waited, counted to 45 in his head. Then he stood up and moved quietly to the stairs. He took them slowly, avoiding the creaky spots he'd memorized over the years. When he reached the top, he positioned himself just outside the bedroom door. The phone in his jacket pocket was still recording. And through the door, David could hear Rachel's voice. Low, frantic, and absolutely, devastatingly clear. Van, we have a massive problem. David pressed his back against the wall and closed his eyes. This was it. This was the moment he'd either be proven wrong or have his worst fears confirmed. He held his breath and listened. David just told me he lost $340,000 in some crypto scam. There was a pause. Vanessa must have responded, but David couldn't hear her side of the conversation. Only Rachel's. No, I'm not joking. Everything. His entire investment account. Gone. Another pause. David's heart was pounding so hard he was afraid Rachel might hear it through the door. What do you mean cut my losses? Rachel's voice rose slightly, sharp with panic. Vanessa, we're 8 months away from the 7-year mark. You think I can live with him pretending everything's fine for 8 more months while he's broke? And what if he doesn't rebuild by then? My attorney said the maintenance calculation is based on his financial situation at the time of separation. If he's drowning in debt with no investments, I could walk away with almost nothing. David felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Not surprise. Not anymore. Just a terrible, crystalline clarity. I can't just file now. 8 months of waiting would be wasted and I'd get a fraction of what we planned. Remember? Wait until 7 years, then file. He has that 401k worth about $185,000, plus his Vanguard account. Well, had his Vanguard account. Split that, plus maintenance based on his $240,000 salary for at least 5 years? Van, we calculated I'd walk away with close to $500,000 total over time. That was the entire plan. David's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs, forcing himself to stay still. To keep listening, because this wasn't over yet. What choice do I have? Rachel continued. I could stay and hope he rebuilds fast enough. No, you're right, that's stupid. For all I know, he'll be in debt for years, and I'll have waited all this time for maintenance based on a salary that's being garnished for taxes and loans. Maybe I should just file now and take what I can get. At least the 401k is still substantial. Another pause. Longer this time. And when Rachel spoke again, her voice had dropped lower. Colder. Like she was saying something she knew was ugly but didn't care anymore. I know it seems cold, but Van, you know what? I stopped being in love with him about 18 months ago. Maybe longer. He's boring. He comes home, plays video games, talks about blockchain and APIs and other tech stuff I don't care about, goes to bed at 9:30 like he's 50 years old. I'm 33. I'm not spending the rest of my life like this. The money is it's compensation for 6 years of mediocrity. David turned away from the door. He walked back down the stairs on silent feet, his mind reeling but his body moving on autopilot. He went to the home office and closed the door, pulled out his phone and stopped the recording. His hands were still shaking, but not from sadness. From rage. From the crystalline clarity of betrayal captured in digital audio. From knowing that the woman upstairs wasn't his wife anymore. She was a stranger who'd calculated their marriage down to dollar amounts and waiting periods. Who'd stopped loving him 18 months ago but stayed anyway because leaving too early would cost her money. David sat down at his desk and stared at his phone. The recording was there. 16 minutes and 42 seconds of Rachel laying out her entire strategy. Her entire plan. Her entire mercenary approach to what was supposed to be a partnership. He called Jennifer Pock. She answered on the second ring. I got it, David said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Distant. Every word. She laid out the whole plan. Play it for me. David played the recording. He heard Jennifer's sharp intake of breath halfway through, right around the part where Rachel said she'd stopped being in love with him 18 months ago. When it finished, Jennifer was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke, and her voice had that sharp, professional edge that meant she was already 3 steps ahead. This is even better than I hoped, David. What she just described is textbook economic opportunism in divorce law. She's essentially admitted that she's staying in the marriage solely to increase her financial benefit. This recording could potentially eliminate or severely reduce any maintenance claim she tries to make. What do I do now? First, secure your assets. Tomorrow morning, first thing, go to the bank and move half the money from your joint checking account into a separate account in only your name. That's your legal right. Second, change your beneficiaries on your life insurance and 401k immediately. Remove her name, put someone else, your mother, your sister, whoever. Third, we're going to file for divorce before she does, and we're going to include this recording as evidence of her intentions. File first? David's mind was still catching up. Absolutely. We're going to catch her completely off guard. She thinks she has 8 more months to position herself. We're going to pull the rug out from under her this week. David felt a grim smile cross his face for the first time in hours. Do it. One more thing. Jennifer's voice softened slightly. Don't let on that you know anything. Can you keep up the act for a few more days? I can do whatever it takes. Good. I'll start drafting the papers tonight. We'll have you in my office Wednesday morning to sign. She'll be served by Friday. David hung up and sat in the darkened office. Upstairs, he could hear Rachel moving around. Footsteps crossing the bedroom, the bathroom door opening and closing. Normal sounds. Domestic sounds. The sounds of a life that was about to implode. There was a knock on the office door. David looked up. Rachel opened it slowly, her face carefully arranged into an expression of sympathetic concern. Hey, she said softly. I'm sorry I disappeared like that. This is just such shocking news. David looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in 6 years, he saw her clearly. Not as his wife, not as his partner, but as someone who'd made a calculated decision to treat him like an investment that hadn't paid out yet. It's okay, David said. He kept his voice gentle. Understanding. I know it's scary. Rachel came into the office and sat on the edge of his desk. Her hand touched his shoulder. The gesture probably looked tender from the outside, but David felt nothing. Just the weight of someone's hand on his shirt. We'll figure it out, Rachel said. We're a team, right? For better or worse. The irony of those wedding vows coming out of her mouth almost made David laugh. But he kept his face neutral. Even managed to look grateful. Thanks, Rach. That means a lot. She smiled, squeezed his shoulder, and David wondered how he'd ever believed that smile was real. You should probably start looking into how much you'll get from unemployment if things get worse, Rachel said. And we should sit down and really look at our budget. Figure out what we can cut. She was already calculating, already running the numbers, already trying to figure out if it was worth staying or if she should cut her losses and file now. I will, David promised. First thing tomorrow. Rachel stood up. I'm going to take a bath and head to bed early. Today has been exhausting. Good night. David watched her leave, watched her walk out of the office and close the door behind her. And he felt nothing. No sadness, no longing, not even anger anymore. Just a cold, calm determination to make sure she didn't get away with what she'd planned. Tomorrow morning, David would go to the bank. He'd moved $28,000, exactly half of their joint savings, into a new account that only had his name on it. He'd call his HR department and change his 401k beneficiary from Rachel to his sister. He'd do the same with his life insurance policy. And on Wednesday, he'd sit in Jennifer Pack's office and sign divorce papers that would detonate Rachel's entire strategy. She thought she had 8 more months. She thought she was in control. She thought David was just a boring tech guy who went to bed at 9:30 and didn't notice when his wife stopped loving him. But David had noticed, and now he was going to make sure Rachel understood exactly what it felt like to have your carefully laid plans destroyed. He opened his laptop and started making a list. Bank, beneficiaries, attorney meeting, and underneath those items, he wrote one more thing. Job applications. Because even though David hadn't actually lost his job or his money, he needed to keep up the appearance for a few more days. He needed Rachel to believe the lie long enough for Jennifer to finalize the paperwork. So he'd apply to a few fake positions online. Make sure Rachel could see him doing it. Play the part of a man whose world had collapsed. It was manipulative. It was calculated. It was exactly the kind of thing Rachel had been doing to him for months. And David felt absolutely no guilt about it. He spent the next hour browsing job sites and submitting applications to positions he had no intention of taking. Financial recovery consultant, investment advisor, risk management specialist. All jobs that would make sense for someone trying to rebuild after a major loss. Around 10 o'clock, David heard the bathtub drain upstairs. Heard Rachel moving around in the bedroom. Heard the click of the lamp being turned off. He waited another 30 minutes. Then he went upstairs. Rachel was already in bed, facing away from him toward the wall. David changed into pajamas and slid under the covers. The space between them felt like an ocean. Good night, David said quietly. Rachel didn't respond. Either she was already asleep, or she was pretending to be. David didn't care which. He lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, listening to Rachel breathe. And he thought about all the nights they'd spent in this bed. All the times they'd talked about their future. About maybe having kids someday. About growing old together. About building something that would last. But none of that had been real. Not for Rachel. For Rachel, this marriage had been a business transaction that stopped making sense somewhere around 18 months ago. And the only reason she'd stayed was because leaving too early would have cost her money. David closed his eyes. In 3 days, Rachel would be served with divorce papers. And her entire carefully constructed plan would collapse. But tonight, David would sleep next to her one last time. He'd lie here in the dark and pretend everything was fine. Because that's what Rachel had been doing to him for months. And now it was David's turn. Part 2. The next morning, David woke up at 6. Rachel was still asleep, curled on her side with her back to him. He got out of bed quietly, grabbed his clothes from the closet, and dressed in the bathroom. By 6:30, he was in his car heading toward their bank in downtown Brooklyn. The branch opened at 8:30. David sat in a coffee shop across the street and waited, watching the baristas move behind the counter in their practiced choreography. Espresso shots pulled, milk steamed, orders called out. Normal people doing normal things on a normal Tuesday morning. Except nothing about this morning was normal. At 8:28, David crossed the street. At 8:31, he was sitting across from a bank manager named Patricia who smiled professionally and asked how she could help him today. I need to open a new individual savings account, David said. And I need to transfer funds from my joint account into it. Of course. Patricia pulled up his account information on her computer. How much would you like to transfer? $28,000. Exactly half of what's currently in the joint account. Patricia's fingers paused over her keyboard for just a moment. Then she nodded. May I ask if you're separating the accounts for a specific reason? It's just procedure. We need to note it in the system. Personal financial planning, David said. It wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Patricia made a note and continued typing. The transfer took less than 10 minutes. David walked out of the bank with a new account that only had his name on it and $28,000 that Rachel could no longer touch. Step 1 complete. He drove to his office in Manhattan and went straight to our. Changed his 401k beneficiary. Changed his life insurance. Removed Rachel's name from everything and added his sister Emily instead. The HR representative didn't ask questions. She just updated the forms and had him sign the new documents. Step 2 complete. By noon, David was back in Brooklyn, sitting in Jennifer Pack's office for the second time in less than a week. Jennifer had the divorce papers ready. Petition for divorce, grounds for dissolution, equitable distribution of assets, and a proposed settlement that included no spousal maintenance based on documented evidence of economic opportunism. Jennifer slid the papers across her desk. Sign here, here, and here. David signed. His hand didn't shake. His mind didn't second guess. He just signed his name 3 times and pushed the papers back. We're filing this afternoon, Jennifer said. She'll be served on Thursday. That gives you 2 days to prepare for a reaction. What should I expect? Jennifer's smile was sharp. Shock, anger, probably threats, maybe tears, though with someone like Rachel, it's hard to say if they'll be genuine or strategic. The important thing is that you stay calm. Don't engage emotionally. Don't let her manipulate you into feeling guilty. You did what you had to do to protect yourself. David nodded. And if she refuses to settle? Then we go to court. And we play that recording for a judge. And we let her explain under oath why she stayed in a marriage she'd emotionally checked out of just to maximize her financial payout. Jennifer leaned forward. Trust me, David. She'll settle. David left Jennifer's office and went to work. He spent the afternoon in back-to-back meetings about the payment security protocol he'd been developing. Code reviews, architecture discussions, the kind of technical work that usually energized him. But today, David was just going through the motions. His mind was stuck on Thursday. On the moment some process server would walk up to Rachel and hand her papers that would blow up her entire strategy. He got home around 7. Rachel was in the kitchen making a salad. She looked up when he walked in and gave him a small, tight smile. Hey, how was your day? Long, David said. He set his bag down and opened the fridge. Grabbed a beer. You? Fine. I had a client call that ran over, but otherwise quiet. David watched her chop cucumbers. Her movements were efficient, practiced. This was the woman he'd shared meals with for 6 years. The woman he'd laughed with, traveled with, built a life with. And now she was a stranger who'd calculated the value of that life down to the dollar. I applied to some more jobs today, David said. Just in case things get worse. Rachel's knife paused mid-chop. That's probably smart. Yeah. They ate dinner in near silence. Rachel scrolled through her phone between bites. David pretended to read news articles on his tablet. 2 people sitting at the same table, living in completely different worlds. After dinner, Rachel went upstairs to work on a client project. David stayed in the living room and turned on a basketball game. Knicks versus Celtics. He watched the players move across the screen without really seeing them. His mind kept drifting to Thursday. To the knock on the door. To Rachel's face when she realized what was happening. Around 10, Rachel came downstairs and said goodnight. David said goodnight back. She went to bed alone. David stayed on the couch for another hour, staring at the TV, waiting for Thursday to arrive. Wednesday passed in a blur. Work, more fake job applications. Dinner with Rachel where they exchanged maybe 20 words total. Another night of sleeping in the same bed but miles apart. And then it was Thursday. David was at work when his phone buzzed at 2:53 in the afternoon. A text from Jennifer. She's been served. Papers delivered at 2:47 p.m. David stared at the message. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. It was done. The bomb had been dropped. And now all he could do was wait for the explosion. He didn't have to wait long. At 3:15, his phone rang. Rachel's name flashed on the screen. David let it ring 4 times before answering. He wanted her to sit in that panic for just a few extra seconds. Hello. What the hell is this? Rachel's voice was shaking, but not with sadness. With fury. Pure, undiluted rage. I just got served with divorce papers, David. What the hell is going on? David kept his voice calm. Clinical. I think the papers are pretty self-explanatory, Rachel. You can't just, we didn't even talk about this. You lost all your money 3 days ago and now you're divorcing me? Actually, David said, and he let himself enjoy this moment just a little, I didn't lose any money. I lied. I made the whole thing up. Silence. Complete, absolute silence on the other end of the line. David could almost hear Rachel's mind racing, trying to process what he'd just said. What? Her voice came out as barely a whisper. It was a test, Rachel. And you failed spectacularly. I don't understand. Yes, you do, David interrupted. You understand perfectly. I know about your plan. I know you've been waiting for the 7-year mark. I know you've been calculating maintenance and asset splits. I know you stopped loving me 18 months ago but stayed anyway for the money. How do you? Rachel stopped. And David could hear the exact moment she figured it out. You were listening. That night. You listened to my phone call. I did, David confirmed. And I recorded it. And my attorney has that recording. So here's how this is going to go, Rachel. You're going to accept a very reasonable divorce settlement that doesn't include spousal maintenance, given that you've admitted on tape that you stayed in this marriage solely for financial gain. Or we can go to court, and I'll play that recording for a judge, and we'll let them decide how mercenary you really are. You bastard. The word came out like venom. You manipulative bastard, says the woman who calculated our marriage down to dollar amounts and investment account balances, David shot back. You played a game, Rachel. You just didn't realize I knew I was playing too. She hung up on him. David sat at his desk, phone still in his hand, and felt something like peace settle over him. It was done. The truth was out. And whatever happened next, at least David wouldn't be living in a lie anymore. He finished his workday, sent a few emails, had a brief conversation with his team about next week's sprint planning. And then he drove to Michael's apartment in Williamsburg instead of going home. Michael opened the door with a beer in one hand and a confused expression on his face. Dude, what are you doing here? I need a place to crash for a few days, David said. I just served Rachel with divorce papers. Things are about to get ugly. Michael's eyes went wide. Holy shit, get in here. David spent that night on Michael's couch. He texted Rachel that he was staying with a friend while they figured things out. She didn't respond. On Friday morning, Jennifer called. Rachel's attorney reached out. They want to negotiate. What are they proposing? $75,000 plus 3 years of limited maintenance at $3,000 a month. Essentially, they want you to pay her $183,000 total to go away quietly. David felt anger flare in his chest. She's not entitled to that. I know, Jennifer said calmly. I told them our offer stands. But here's the interesting part. Her attorney mentioned that Rachel has been struggling. Apparently, the reality of her situation is setting in. What does that mean? It means the life she thought she was going to fund with your money is evaporating. She can't afford the brownstone on her own. She's going to have to move, probably into a small apartment. Her freelance income is around $35,000 a year, which in Brooklyn isn't much. She built her whole exit strategy around walking away with a substantial nest egg. And now she's facing the reality of actually having to support herself on her own income. David should have felt satisfaction. But mostly he just felt tired. So what happens now? We wait. She has to accept reality eventually. The recording is too damaging, and she knows it. The weekend crawled by. David stayed at Michael's place, slept on the couch, ordered too much takeout. He thought about going back to the brownstone to get more of his things, but the thought of seeing Rachel made his stomach turn. Not because he was afraid of her, but because he didn't know what he'd feel when he saw her face. Anger? Sadness? Nothing? He wasn't ready to find out. On Monday morning, David got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. David? It's Vanessa Martinez, Rachel's friend. David felt his defenses slam into place. What do you want, Vanessa? I need to talk to you. Not for Rachel. For me. Can we meet for coffee? Against every instinct telling him this was a bad idea, David heard himself say yes. They met at a cafe in Carroll Gardens. Neutral territory. Vanessa was already there when David arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee clutched in both hands. She looked terrible, tired, drawn, guilty. I need to apologize, Vanessa said before David even sat down. For my part in all of this. David pulled out a chair but didn't sit. Not yet. Your part? Rachel told you she stopped loving you 18 months ago. Vanessa's hands were shaking. That's not true. Or at least, it's not the whole truth. She was happy, David. Really happy. But she paused, and David saw tears forming in her eyes. I got divorced 3 years ago. Messy, awful divorce. But I walked away with $280,000 in settlement money. And I made the mistake of telling Rachel about it. Bragging about it. David felt something cold settle in his stomach. He sat down. I didn't mean to plant ideas, Vanessa continued. But I was bitter. I'd been married to Marcus for 9 years. Supported him through business school. And when his startup got acquired, when he finally made real money, he left me for his COO. 26-year-old MBA with perfect teeth and no moral compass. I felt like that settlement money was the only good thing that came out of those years. And I think I made Rachel start seeing her marriage to you through a financial lens. She's an adult, David said quietly. She made her own choices. I know, but I encouraged her when she'd complain about you. And honestly, David, they were normal complaints. You play video games too much. You talk about work constantly. You're not the most spontaneous guy. Normal stuff. Things every couple deals with. But I'd say things like, well, at least he makes good money. Or you've put in 6 years, might as well see it through to 7. I turned her into this calculating person she wasn't before. David studied Vanessa's face. She looked genuinely remorseful. But that didn't change what Rachel had done. That didn't erase the recording of his wife coldly discussing her exit strategy like it was a stock portfolio. Why are you telling me this? David asked. Because Rachel's falling apart, Vanessa said bluntly. She's lost 15 pounds in a week. She's not sleeping. She's barely working. And I realized that I helped destroy something that might have been fixable if I hadn't been pouring poison in her ear for the past 2 years. She wasn't a gold digger, David. She became one because I taught her to think that way. That doesn't change what she did. I know. And she should face the consequences. I'm not asking you to take her back or anything like that. Vanessa's voice broke. I needed you to know that the Rachel you fell in love with was real. The person she became, I helped create that. And I'm sorry. Vanessa left after that. David sat alone with his coffee, trying to process what she'd told him. Could Rachel have been influenced by a bitter friend? Absolutely. But that didn't erase her choices. Adults were responsible for their own decisions, even when friends gave terrible advice. Still, the conversation nagged at him. That night, David did something he'd been avoiding. He went through old photos on his laptop. Pictures from their early years together. Their wedding day, Rachel in a simple white dress, smiling at him like he was the only person in the world. Thanksgiving dinner at his parents' house, Rachel laughing at some joke his dad had made. A sunset walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, Rachel's hand in his, her eyes full of something that looked a lot like love. When had that changed? When had she stopped seeing him as a partner and started seeing him as a meal ticket? Or had Vanessa's bitterness slowly poisoned something that could have been saved? David's phone rang. Jennifer Pock. She's ready to sign, Jennifer said without preamble. Rachel accepted the original settlement offer. No maintenance. Split the assets as proposed. Her attorney sent over the signed agreement this afternoon. David felt a strange mix of relief and hollowness. That's good. When's it final? We can file with the court tomorrow. Given that you've been separated for over 30 days and there's an agreement in place, the judge will likely grant the divorce within a few weeks. Okay, do it. There's one more thing, Jennifer said. Rachel included a personal note with the settlement agreement. I'm not supposed to show you this, but, she paused. I think you should read it. Jennifer emailed him a scanned image. David opened it on his phone. The note was handwritten. Rachel's familiar looping script that he'd seen on birthday cards and grocery lists and post-it notes stuck to the fridge. David, I'm signing your settlement because you're right. I don't deserve maintenance. I don't deserve anything from you except maybe your contempt. Vanessa told me she'd talked to you. I didn't ask her to, but I'm glad she did, because there's something I need you to understand, even if you never forgive me. I did love you. I do love you. I just lost sight of what that meant. When Vanessa told me about her divorce settlement, something broke in my brain. I started seeing our marriage as a safety net instead of a partnership. I started thinking about exit strategies instead of building a life. And by the time I realized how twisted my thinking had become, I was already meeting with attorneys and calculating numbers. You deserve better than that. You deserved someone who valued you for who you are, not what you could provide. I'm sorry I became someone who couldn't do that. I hope you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. And I hope someday I figure out how to be a better person than the one you discovered I'd become. Rachel. David read the note 3 times. It didn't change anything. It didn't erase the betrayal or the calculation or the fact that she'd stayed in their marriage as a strategy. But it did make him sad in a way he hadn't expected. Because he believed she meant it. And that made everything worse somehow. Knowing that the person she'd become wasn't who she'd wanted to be, but she'd become it anyway. He deleted the image and set his phone down. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in early February. David didn't go to the courthouse. There was no hearing required since they'd both signed the settlement agreement. He just got an email from Jennifer with a PDF attachment. Final divorce decree. Dissolution of marriage. Effective immediately. David Chen was officially single again. Officially free. Officially done with the worst chapter of his life. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because consequences have a way of rippling outward in ways no one expects. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, David's life had settled into something resembling normal. He'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Cobble Hill. Nothing fancy, but it was his. He'd furnished it with real furniture instead of the hastily acquired basics from those first few weeks. He'd started rock climbing at Brooklyn Boulders 3 times a week. Started going on dates. Nothing serious, but enough to remind himself that connection was still possible. Work had become more than just a refuge. David had thrown himself into his payment security protocol, working nights and weekends, and the CTO had noticed. 2 weeks ago, she'd called him into her office and offered him a promotion to principal architect with a salary bump to $285,000. You've been doing this level work for months anyway, she'd said. It's time we recognize that officially. David had accepted. And for the first time in a long time, he'd felt something like pride. He hadn't heard from Rachel since the divorce was final. He'd blocked her on social media, though occasionally curiosity would make him unblock her temporarily just to see how she was doing. She'd moved into a studio apartment in Sunset Park. Her Instagram posts were less frequent now. She looked thinner in the photos. Harder, but also somehow more determined. David would look for 5 minutes, then block her again. It was a ritual he wasn't proud of, but he wasn't ready to completely disconnect either. It was Michael who mentioned Vanessa again. They were at a sports bar in Williamsburg watching the Knicks game when Michael casually said, "Hey, didn't your ex-wife have a friend named Vanessa? Vanessa Martinez?" David felt a familiar tension. "Yeah, why? I saw her at Whole Foods last week. She looked rough, man. Real rough. Didn't say anything, but she was crying in the parking lot. Thought you should know." "Why would I need to know that?" Michael shrugged. "I don't know. She was part of that whole mess, right? But she also tried to make it right by telling you the truth. Just thought you'd care." The conversation bothered David more than it should have. He tried to push it aside, but it lingered. Finally, after 3 days of thinking about it, he did something impulsive. He called Vanessa. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice wary. "David? Yeah, can we talk?" They met at the same cafe where she'd apologized months ago. This time, Vanessa looked even worse. Her eyes were hollow. Her hands shook when she picked up her coffee. "Are you okay?" David asked, surprising himself with genuine concern. Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Define okay. I'm alive. I'm employed. But otherwise, not really." "What happened?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then the whole story spilled out. After her conversation with David, Vanessa had been consumed with guilt about her role in Rachel's transformation. She'd started seeing a therapist, trying to work through her own bitterness about her divorce and how she'd projected that onto her friend. But the real problem had started when her ex-husband Marcus found out about Vanessa's role in encouraging Rachel's divorce strategy. "Marcus and Rachel's attorney know each other professionally," Vanessa explained. "Word got around about what happened with you and Rachel. About the recording, the strategy, all of it. Marcus called me last month and told me he's reopening our divorce settlement." David felt his stomach drop. Can he do that? Apparently, yes. In certain circumstances. He's claiming I misrepresented my intentions during our divorce. That I told the court I wanted to reconcile when I was actually strategizing with an attorney about maximizing my payout. She paused. Which is true. I did the same thing I encouraged Rachel to do. I hired a divorce attorney 8 months before I told Marcus I wanted a divorce. I positioned myself strategically. And now he has evidence. What evidence? Emails, text messages. I emailed Rachel about my strategy while I was still married to Marcus. Things like playing the long game and making sure I get what I'm owed. Marcus's attorney subpoenaed my email records as part of the reopening, and they found everything. Vanessa's hands were really shaking now. David, they could claw back a significant portion of my settlement. Maybe all of it. And I've already spent a lot of it. On my apartment, my car, that trip to Japan I took last year. I could end up in debt. Serious debt. David sat back in his chair. Part of him felt a grim satisfaction. This was karma, pure and simple. But another part of him felt something closer to pity. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Vanessa looked up, surprised. You're sorry? Why would you be sorry? Because what you did was wrong, but what you're facing seems disproportionate. And because you at least tried to make it right by telling me the truth. That counts for something. Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes. I don't deserve your compassion. I helped destroy your marriage. My marriage was destroyed the moment Rachel decided to see me as a financial asset instead of a partner, David corrected gently. You influenced that, yes. But Rachel made her choices. Adults are responsible for their own decisions. They sat in silence for a while. Then David asked, what are you going to do? Vanessa wiped her eyes. Fight it, I guess. Get a lawyer. Try to prove that even though my intentions were mercenary, the original settlement was still fair based on the marriage's actual circumstances. But honestly, I think I'm going to lose. And maybe I should. Nobody deserves to be bankrupted. Maybe not, Vanessa replied. But I helped teach Rachel to treat marriage like a business transaction. And I did the same thing to my own husband. Maybe this is just the universe making sure I understand exactly how much damage that kind of thinking causes. David left the cafe feeling unsettled. That evening, he did something he hadn't done in weeks. He unblocked Rachel on Instagram and sent her a direct message. We need to talk. It's about Vanessa. Rachel replied within 5 minutes. What about her? They agreed to meet for coffee the next day. It would be their first face-to-face interaction since the divorce was finalized. David saw her waiting when he arrived at the cafe. She looked different. Thinner, yes, but also somehow more present. Less distracted. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Hi, she said softly when he sat down. Hi. They ordered coffee in awkward silence. Then David explained Vanessa's situation. The reopened settlement. The emails. The potential financial devastation. Rachel's face went pale. Oh my God. I didn't know. She didn't tell me. I think she was too ashamed, David said. But here's the thing, Rachel. Vanessa influenced you, but you made the ultimate decision to treat our marriage the way you did. And now she's facing consequences that seem worse than what you faced. That doesn't seem right. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe you could provide a statement for her case. Explain that while she gave you advice, you were ultimately responsible for your own choices. That she wasn't some mastermind manipulator. She was a bitter friend venting. And you chose to take that venting as a blueprint. Would that help her case? I don't know. Maybe. It might show that her influence was less calculated than Marcus's attorney is claiming. Rachel studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Why do you care? Vanessa helped ruin our marriage. Because carrying around anger and bitterness about what happened is exhausting, David replied honestly. And because revenge isn't the same thing as justice. Vanessa doesn't deserve to be destroyed financially for giving bad advice, even if that advice was really bad. Rachel nodded slowly. I'll do it. I'll write a statement. Thank you. They sipped their coffee in silence for a minute. Then Rachel spoke again. I started therapy 5 weeks ago. I'm trying to figure out how I became the person who could do what I did to you. To us. That's good, David said, and meant it. My therapist says I have issues with security. That growing up with parents who were constantly one paycheck away from eviction made me hyper-focused on financial stability to the point where it overrode everything else. That I started seeing relationships as transactions because that's how my parents' relationship functioned. Dad stayed because mom paid the bills. Mom stayed because dad watched us while she worked 3 jobs. I didn't know that about your parents, David said. I never told you. I was ashamed of it. But the therapist says that shame drove me to overcompensate. By trying to secure myself financially, even at the expense of emotional connection. David absorbed this. It didn't excuse what Rachel had done, but it did provide context. Are you doing okay financially? Rachel gave a small, sad smile. I'm getting by. I picked up more clients. I'm teaching a web design workshop at Pratt twice a week. It's tight, but I'm managing. And weirdly, I think I'm happier. Or at least more honest with myself. I'm not living some fantasy life I built up in my head funded by someone else's money. I'm just living. That's something. It is. Rachel paused. David, I know my note didn't change anything, but I want you to know that I'm really, genuinely sorry. Not just for what I did, but for who I became. You deserved so much better. I know I did, David said simply. But I also want you to know something. I forgive you. Rachel's eyes widened. What? I forgive you. Not because what you did was okay. It wasn't. Not because I want to get back together. I don't, but because I don't want to carry that anger around anymore. Forgiving you is for me, not for you. Tears streamed down Rachel's face. I don't deserve that. Probably not, David admitted. But I'm giving it anyway. They talked for another hour. Not about logistics or lawyers or settlements, but about life. Rachel told him about the meditation practice she'd started. David told her about his promotion in rock climbing. They talked about whether the Knicks would ever make it past the first round. It wasn't the conversation of a married couple. But it wasn't the conversation of enemies either. It was something else. Two people who had once shared a life, acknowledging that while that life was over, they could both still move forward. When they parted ways, Rachel gave him a quick, awkward hug. Thank you. For this. For forgiving me. For trying to help Vanessa. Take care of yourself, Rachel. You too. True to her word, Rachel provided a detailed statement for Vanessa's case. She explained the context of Vanessa's advice, acknowledged her own role in choosing to act on it, and made clear that Vanessa was not the architect of Rachel's divorce strategy. Just a bitter friend who'd vented about her own experiences. Combined with David's testimony, which Jennifer helped him prepare, the statement helped Vanessa's case significantly. The judge ultimately decided not to claw back the entire settlement, but did reduce it by $82,000, which Vanessa would have to repay over time. It wasn't a complete victory, but it wasn't total devastation either. Vanessa reached out to David afterward. Her text message was simple. Thank you for giving me a chance at redemption. I won't waste it. 4 months later, David was at Michael's wedding. The reception was at a loft in Dumbo with views of the Manhattan Bridge. David was standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey, when he saw someone across the room who made him pause. A woman about his age with warm eyes and an easy smile. She was talking animatedly with the bride, her hands moving expressively as she told some story that made them both laugh. Who is that? David asked Michael. That's the bride's sister, Lauren. She's a physical therapist. Just moved to Brooklyn from Boston. Want me to introduce you? David hesitated. For just a moment, he thought about Rachel. About how loving someone and losing them had nearly destroyed him. About whether he was ready to risk that kind of pain again. Then he looked at Lauren again. Saw her throw her head back laughing. Saw the light catch in her hair. Saw the possibility of something new, something better, something real. Yeah, David said, I think I do. As Michael led him across the room, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not hope that Lauren would be the one. Not hope for some fairy tale ending. Just simple, quiet hope that good things could still happen. That life could still surprise him in positive ways. That sometimes, after everything falls apart, you get a chance to build something new. Michael tapped Lauren on the shoulder. Lauren, this is my friend David. David, this is Lauren. Lauren turned and smiled. Her handshake was firm. Her eyes were kind. Hi David, how do you know Michael? And just like that, David started a conversation that might lead nowhere or might lead somewhere. But either way, he was ready to find out. Because the lesson David had learned over the past 6 months wasn't about revenge or even justice. It was simpler and more profound than that. People will reveal who they really are when tested. Some will fail that test spectacularly. Some will fail but find a way to grow from it. And some will surprise you by choosing honesty and growth over self-protection. The key was knowing which was which. Protecting yourself accordingly, but also leaving room for the possibility of change. In others, and most importantly, in yourself. Rachel had taught him what he wouldn't accept in a relationship. What he wouldn't tolerate. What he deserved. Vanessa had taught him about the complexity of influence and responsibility. About how bitterness can poison everything it touches if you let it. And his own experience had taught him that sometimes the most satisfying ending isn't revenge. It's letting go, moving forward, building something better with the lessons you've learned. 6 months after his divorce, David Chen was standing at a wedding, talking to a woman who saw him as just David. Not as a paycheck, not as a safety net, not as a calculation, just as a man worth getting to know. He'd advanced in his career. He'd maintained his dignity while protecting his interests. He'd forgiven the people who'd hurt him, not because they'd earned it, but because he deserved peace. And Rachel? She was teaching design, going to therapy, slowly rebuilding a life based on authenticity rather than calculation. She'd learned the hard way that treating relationships as transactions leaves you bankrupt in the ways that matter most. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's becoming a better version of yourself while others deal with the consequences of their own choices. David had tested his wife by saying he lost all their savings. What he overheard next changed everything. But in facing that truth, in documenting it and protecting himself, he'd ultimately freed both of them to become better people than they'd been together. That was worth more than any settlement. Worth more than any amount of money. Worth more than winning. Because in the end, David hadn't just protected his assets. He'd protected something far more valuable. His ability to trust again. His ability to love again. His ability to hope again. And as he stood there talking to Lauren, watching her smile, feeling that flutter of possibility in his chest, David realized something important. The story of his marriage ending wasn't a tragedy. It was a transformation. A painful, necessary transformation that had broken him down so he could build himself back up into someone stronger, wiser, and more whole. The brownstone in Park Slope was just a house. The money was just money. But the man David had become through losing both? That was something no one could take away. He laughed at something Lauren said. She laughed back. And somewhere in that moment, David let go of the last piece of anger he'd been carrying. Rachel was Rachel's responsibility now. Vanessa was learning her own lessons. And David? David was finally, fully, completely free. If you enjoyed this story, take a moment to like this video. Leave a comment telling me what you thought. What would you have done in David's situation? Would you have tested your partner, or would you have confronted them directly? Would you have forgiven like David did, or would you have held onto that anger? And if you're not already subscribed to Untold Desires by Mr. Lewis, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Because every day, we bring you stories like this. Stories about betrayal and redemption. About love and loss. About the choices we make when we're tested and the people we become because of them. This is Mr. Lewis, reminding you that sometimes the hardest tests reveal the most important truths. And sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.